Hi again. Here we are to continue with our movie app. I'm in Xcode here. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to add an image to our table view, right? So currently our app shows a list of movies, and it shows the name of each movie right here. What I'd like to do is I'd like to load an image and put it over here. The default table view has an image view that it can display, but the image view doesn't show by default, right? So if you've not assigned any image to it, then there's nothing there, and the text moves over flush to the left margin. If you add the image view, it pushes the text to the right and makes a little space and puts the image in here. Right now we've loaded the image here, and we're going to follow the same procedure that we did to load this image, but we'll do it here inside of our table view cell, okay? So let's give it a try. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to get the URL for the image. And right now I'm using this long thing here just to get to a movie object so I can ask for the properties from that movie object, like the name, for example. If we're going to be accessing that movie object over and over again, and that would be the movie object in the movies array at this index, right? Then we might as well, get that out first, and then just access that, and that'll make our code a lot clearer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a variable here called movie, and then what I'll do is I'll copy this stuff or cut it and paste it right here. And then now I've got a movie object, so anytime I want to get a property from the movie object, I can just say movie.name, and that's very clear. And so we can do the same thing when we get the image. So let's get the image right now. So what we want to do, and I'll put a little, I'll say load image, right? So what we'll do here is we'll say let URL equal movie. Oh wait, actually let's do URL bracket, right? And we want to get the we want to create a URL from a string. So we'll say URL string, and the string that we want is movie.image, and we'll get the small image, okay, image 60. Okay, so now that we've got the URL, we can make a URL session. So we'll say let session equal URL session shared session dot data task with URL and completion handler. Okay, so we want this one right here, and I'll hit return. And our URL right here, this is an optional because the URL class makes a URL out of a string, but the string might not be a valid URL. It kind of checks. So if this is not a valid URL, then the URL isn't valid and it gives you a nil. So I kind of know these are probably going to be valid, so I'll put the exclamation point. Maybe later on we want to go back and check for nil here, but for right now we'll use the exclamation point. Okay, so now that we've got our URL, that will be the URL here. We'll set that parameter, right? And then if I scroll to the right here, you can see I've got completion handler, and completion handler is a function that takes data, URL response, and error messages as parameters going in, and then returns nothing going out. So what we'll do is we'll just select this and hit return, and then the computer will fill in the values for us and write the closure. So that's kind of convenient. Okay, so how does this work? Well, the closure begins with the curly brace, and then these are the parameters, and it wants us to name these parameters. So we'll call this one data, this one response, and this one error. Now data is the data we've loaded. It's optional in case we don't load any data. Response is a response from the server, and it tells us whether the server was working correctly or if it has any errors that it wants to send us. So these errors come from outside of our program. And then the error here is an error. I think it's an internal error, and it tells us like, hey, data task had an error, okay? And then we say in, and then this is where our code block begins, okay? So in our code block here, what we want to do is we want to create an image from the data and then set that image as the image view in the cell. Okay, so before we do that, let's do one more thing. Now, if you recall from the other times we used URLSession, the session doesn't actually load anything until we tell it to start loading. So outside of this curly brace here, I'm going to type session.resume. Okay, and this will tell our URL session that we made here that it should begin, loading the stuff at this URL. Okay. Okay, so now that we got that, we can go into the code block here, right, inside this code block, and we can say let image equal UI image, and then we'll make an image from data, okay, because we can make an image from raw data, which is what we have in this case. This, if you recall, this data right here was an optional. So we might want to do some checking for nil here, but for the test right now, just to keep the code here as simple as possible, we'll just unwrap this with the exclamation point. But later maybe we want to come back and check for nil here and check for nil here, right? Okay, now that we've got an image, the cell has an image view. So an image view is a class that displays an image, right? So we've made an image and now we can display it with this class, right? So we'll say image view, and image view has a property called image. This is the image that the image view displays, and we'll set that equal to our image, okay? And one more thing, right? So this runs on a background thread, and so we run into weird problems when we try to update the main thread, our UI, when we do that from a background thread. So we need to move this up to the main thread. So what we'll do is we'll say dispatch queue, and I'm going to put it here, and this is going to create a block, and then I'll put this code in the block here. So we'll say dispatch queue.main. So dispatch queue is the kind of the manager for all of the threads, right? And then main is our main thread. And then we'll use the async method, which takes a closure, just a simple parameter, simple function that doesn't take any parameters or return anything. It's just a simple code block. So we'll use that code block to execute the code here on the main thread. Okay. So we'll cut this stuff out right here and paste it inside here. Okay. And there we go, right? So that's pretty good. We're going to have one other problem, and I'll explain why in a moment here. So let's give it a test. So I'll run it. And there's our movie, and I don't see any images, but when I scroll, all of a sudden images start showing up. And then when I scroll back up to the top, whoa, there's images again, right? So where did those guys come from? That's pretty weird. Well, the thing is, as the cells are scrolling by here, remember they're getting recycled, right? And then images are loaded into them. So we kind of have a weird thing going there where it's not updating when we expect, but then when we update the cell or refresh the cell, then all of a sudden the image shows up. So the problem there is that when we initially load the cell, there's only the text label. Okay, even though we're starting this thing here, this code inside here isn't run until after the table view creates this cell. So imagine we did this, and then we said, hey, let's start loading an image. And then, we return the cell. So we returned a cell without an image in it. Okay, so when the table view is displaying that, it displays the text label all the way over on the left side, but it doesn't leave enough room for the image. So it might load the image, but there's still no space for it, right? So what we need to do is we need to tell the cell that it needs to relay out its subviews, right? Because we've added a new image, and the image view needs to show up and needs to have some space on the left. So what we'll do is inside the same block right here, we'll say cell.set needs layout. Okay, so we'll tell the cell like, hey, you know what? You need to relay out your subviews. Okay, and then that should hopefully tell it to make some space for the image that we just loaded, and then the image will show up. So we'll give it one more test. Any moment now. Why is my thing not running? Let's try it one more time. Don't you hate it when that happens? Let's try it again. Is this thing just not cooperating here today? Oh, there we go. Okay, oh, there we go. And then all the images load up, right? So that seemed to work pretty good. Right, got Hocus Pocus there, Legend of Tarzan, right? So anyway, so thanks for watching, and then I hope that that works for you. Give it a try.